Okay, so I want to welcome everyone to the next class, which is Keith Wesley, XLights 101. Take it away, Keith.
Thanks, Ed. All right. So I think I've got like 3 hours to introduce you to XLights, which is when you think about it, when we normally run this training at Expo, which we've done for the last few years, and prior to that, independently of Expo, Sean and I have run a 2-day training course. Sean did one room, did the beginner class, and I did the advanced room, and so in total it was 32 hours of training spread across 2 rooms. It's going to be very difficult to get through a lot of XLights in just 3 hours. So what we're going to do is we're going to focus just on those basics to get you going. We're going to I'll teach a little bit quicker than Sean does. Sean tends to go through it a lot more slowly in the training that we run, because it's really about making sure that everyone in the room keeps up. But I assume that this will be on video, and you can't hear my audio. Okay. I'm not sure why. Anyway, so basically, XLights is an open source project we created way back in 2012 by Matt Brown. Back then, it was just essentially a show player, much like FPP or Xschedule today, and it was primarily orientated to be better for playing Lightorama shows than the Lightorama player was at the time. Matt approached Sean, and they merged with an effects generator that Sean had developed called Nutcracker. And then that led us to XLights version 3. If you download XLights version 3, which is still available on the XLights page, you'll find that it looks very little like XLights today. All the effects, or a lot of the effects, are still there, but usability-wise, it's much, much harder to use. And then version 4 came along in, I think it was 2017, when David Pitts changed the way you interact with XLights and made it much more like a timeline and laying effects out. And then Dan and Gil came along and built out or improved the layout panels, and fixed the rendering and made that all multi-threaded, and it's developed since then. I am one of the developers. I came along after those guys, and have been working on simplifying and enhancing XLights and trying to make it both easier to use, but also more powerful and more capable. XLights is never going to be simple to use. Fundamentally, we are trying to provide an enormous amount of flexibility to support a large number of use cases. And that inherently drives a certain amount of complexity into the product. Instead, what we've been doing is trying to tackle the problem from an end-to-end basis. And so rather than just sticking to sequencing, XLights has really branched out and now configures controllers and manages your controllers. It'll discover your controllers and things like that as well, which kind of sets XLights apart from most of the other sequencers. XLights is free. If you paid money for your XLights license, then someone's taking a lend to you. Chuck, can you turn your camera off? The only thing that we really ask people to do is to participate constructively in the community. There are lots of opportunities to participate in the community, whether it's in the Zoom room, the official XLights Facebook group, or helping us by reporting bugs, so that in a really good way, and the bug report form really does ask for a bunch of information, and when people report bugs well, we generally get onto them pretty quickly. And we don't expect financial, there is no license fee. There is an opportunity for you to support the project through a donation, but we don't expect it. We don't treat you any differently whether you do or you do not donate. So it comes down to a personal choice. So today what I wanted to do was I want to start off with an absolute fresh install. I want to try to take you from your first install of XLights. I'm not going to go through how to install the software. I'll assume that you've managed to install it, but I will go through how you set up your show folder, getting your preferences right, building your layout, setting up a controller or two, creating a sequence, how to import a sequence, and how to sort of start getting going on sequencing. Sequencing is a massive topic. I can teach you the underlying mechanics. I can tell you how it works behind the scenes. I can show you all the things that are in your palette. But I can't teach you to be a great artist. That's something that you'll need to practice and experiment with. I don't want this to be 3 hours, sterile hours of me talking. I encourage questions along the way. I really don't mind if people want to unmute and ask a question as long as it's relevant and in the flow of the conversation that's going on. As I said, I don't normally teach the beginners class. I do a beginners YouTube video at least once or twice a year. I will tend to go through this a lot quicker, but with access to the video later, hopefully those that I leave behind will be able to catch up. So let's start. Obviously, by now you would have all sorry. You would have all downloaded XLights using the download page link here. There are versions available for Windows, OS X and Linux. If you do the download and you download XLights, please make sure you also download the VAMP plugins. Please download them from wherever you download your copy of XLights. There's a couple of versions of the VAMP plugins. We use a version that's built off 1.7.0. We know that works with XLights 1.7.1, which has been available for quite a long time. It can be a little bit buggy, so no. So once you've downloaded it and installed it and you run it, the first thing after the splash screen, which is on my other screen at the moment, but we'll just let the splash screen go, it will come up and it will prompt you for a show folder. Now, the show folder is a really, really important concept. So before we go and just quickly answer this dialogue, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to a folder here where I'm going to put my show folder. It won't be this folder here. But what we want to do is we want to create a folder where we're going to keep all of our XLights related things. Your show folder is the root of everything in your show, and you want it to be a special place that contains everything that is used inside your show. Now, lots of people, of course, want to separate things by years, and so that's okay. If you want to create a folder, called 2020, for instance, here, that's fine, but don't make that your show folder. By making it your show folder, it will cause problems over time as it relates to finding files, because next year you'll create a 2021. At some point in time, you will delete your 2020 folder. And at that point, all of the links to all the things that were in your 2020 folder will be broken, even if you've moved those things forward into your 2021 or 2022 folders. So the suggestion we make is that you then create a folder within that folder. And it doesn't matter what you call it, but call it something that's not date related. Call it Christmas. Mine happens to be called Home. You can call it whatever you want to call it. It really doesn't matter, but create a folder with a benign name that you're not going to want to change year to year, and then put it inside your 2020 folder. And next year you can copy the 2020 folder, including your Christmas folder, call it 2021, and work in that Christmas folder. And even if you then went and deleted the 2020 folder, it will still automatically patch all of your file paths to the new 2021 folder, and everything will be fine. So please pay close attention to that, because it's a common source of issues. So let's set the show folder to that. We'll go into our 2020 and we'll go to our Christmas folder here, and we'll click select folder and we'll fire up XLights. Now, the first thing XLights will ask you to do is to suggest to you that you may want to enter your email address. This is entirely up to you. The power of putting your email address here is when XLights has a problem and it crashes, XLights can submit a crash report to us, and we receive these. We go through these periodically, and every now and then we see a crash which we know we can't fix without the files that you might have been working with. And so we use the email address to occasionally reach out and contact people and ask them if they'd like to provide the files and help us to get to the bottom of the problem that they were experiencing. It doesn't happen very often. I think we've done it. I think I've done it maybe twice over the last year or so that this has been there. So it's up to you. You can click no thanks and it won't ask you again. Now, before we get in and start looking at all the tabs and all the buttons and everything here, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about the preferences. So there's a couple of places and a couple of preferences that you really want to get right. The first thing here is you definitely want to make sure backup on launch is set, and you definitely want to back up subfolders. So make sure those are checking. It's up to you whether you purge the backups or not. The backups, the problem with the backups is they do get very big. People have had many gigabytes of backups, so you might choose to delete them after 90 days. And that just means that it will keep anything that's recent, and anything that's really old will get purged. So that keeps a lid on the size of your show. The rest of it, to be honest, I do like extra large model handle sizes. It makes it a little easier for my old eyes to see. The rest is pretty straightforward. I don't think there's a lot here. I would definitely turn off render on save. That just slows things down, and generally you don't need it. So just turn it off. And I like to default model blending to off as well. The render cache locked effects will come into render cache later. It can make a big difference in rendering your sequences. And that's about it, I think. So that's those settings. Okay, it didn't like that. Didn't like my media folder. We'll just use the show folder. Okay, in the view menu, there's a couple other things I like to do. I do like in the perspectives to autosave. What that means is once you lay out all of your windows, all the panels on the screen in the place that you like, every time you close XLights, it saves where they are. It also means if you open up someone else's layout, it doesn't use their screen layout, it uses your screen layout. So that's kind of nice as well. So I generally do that. If you are going to be doing AC light sequencing, by that I mean, you're going to be using something like a Renard or a Lightorama controller to control older AC type lights, you may want to turn the AC toolbar on. The AC toolbar here just makes it easier to sequence those sorts of lights. And we'll touch a little on that when we get into the sequencing section. So all good. So at this point, we're ready to get going. Now, there's three key tabs here that XLights organizes everything into. The controller tab, the layout tab, and the sequencer tab. The controller tab really describes the controllers that you're going to be driving with XLights, whether they are directly attached to your computer, whether they're connected over an Ethernet connection, they're going to be added to this screen here. Now, we don't need to start here. If you don't have a controller yet, if you're not sure yet what you're going to have, you can leave this screen here totally blank and start to use XLights. XLights is not going to care. The place where you should probably start is here in the layout tab. And the layout tab is your opportunity to lay out the props and the models that you're going to be using in your show. Put up your mega tree, attach your house outlines and all of that sort of stuff. And the sequencer tab is where, having laid everything out, you will start to drop effects and turn lights on and make the lights dance to music. So let's start here. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want some sort of backstage to put it onto. Now, before we go there, probably the first decision you need to make is whether you're going to go 2D or 3D. By default, XLights comes in 2D mode. There is a checkbox up here to move it into 3D, where you can start to lay your house out in 3 dimensions. I'm going to spend the bulk of today on 2D. Gil has already done a presentation earlier today on 3D, and there are many videos around on 3D. I'm not going to go through all the ins and outs of how you move props around and everything else. Gil covered that. The one thing I will start with, however, is how do you decide whether 2D or 3D is right for you? 3D gives you some really cool capabilities. It definitely makes your house preview look amazing, etc. It's a lot more fiddly to set up. There's a lot of moving things around to get things right. That being said, there are certain types of property layouts where 3D becomes not essential, but definitely desirable. So if you've got a corner block where people can view your house from multiple sides, if you're doing a whole street rather than just a single house, if you've potentially got a walkthrough display and you want to be able to sequence props from perspectives within the display, 3D might be for you. If you've got lots of time on your hands and you'd really like to see your show in 3D, it makes sense. If you've got a lot of depth to your property rather than just breadth, 3D can really give you some additional capabilities. However, if your house is, relatively flat, if you've really got only a handful of places that people can actually watch your show from, really they're effectively seeing a sort of 2D projection of your house at any rate, and 2D will probably do for you. Now, it's not a permanent decision. You can change over time. You can start your house in 2D, sequence everything, and then later on you can decide, I've got a bit of time now, I want to go and move everything into 3D, and you can do that. Flipping backwards and forwards, though, becomes a little bit hard, because once you start to move props around in 3D space, it does affect how they do when you look at the 2D projection. So it really is a decision that you're making. But it's a little bit easier to demo things in 2D, and for a beginner, I would definitely suggest that for those first few weeks that you're playing with XLights, don't do 3D at all. Just do 2D, get yourself familiar with the concepts of laying things out, maybe associating things with a controller if you've got a controller, and doing some sequencing. You'll save yourself a lot of time and frustration. So the first thing you're going to want to do then is to have some sort of house background, and we'll do that by grabbing a picture. Now, I have prepared some things here, and I have a picture of my house here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag in this and put it into my show folder. Every asset that you are going to use in your show folder, you want to put inside your show folder or inside a subdirectory of your show folder. You can go here. I can create a folder called images, and if I really want to, I can put my house in there and keep my show folder here decluttered. It doesn't really matter, but it has to be either in the show folder or underneath the show folder so that XLights doesn't lose track of it in the future. To set a background image, you come down here to the background image, you click here, click on the ellipsis icon, and we go into the images folder where my house image is, and it will bring in an image of my house that I can hang my lights on. Now, I do like bringing in an image, and this is a very, very old image of my house. This is back before I really had a lot of pixels. But what it does is, by taking a photo with your lights on, it actually becomes a lot easier to position your lights and make sure that you've got everything where it is. I also put a pink dot on the road where I took the photo from, because I know that's going to be the best place to view my show from. And when I video my show in the future, I will always video my show from that pink dot on the street. You can and then go and play with the dimensions of this image. You can make it a bit bigger. The fill will just stretch the image out. And you want to do that. You want to get the image to fill the screen. You don't want to be wasting the space. Now you can, having done this, you can now move things around. If you hold down the middle mouse wheel of your mouse, you can move things around. You can also right click and choose reset, which will reset it back to its default view as well. You can also play with the brightness. So often, particularly if you've taken a photo of your house in the daytime, it's probably very bright, and you may want to lower the brightness of the image down. You may go well below 30%, just so that it doesn't dominate your display. When you start to lay things out, you just need it clear enough that you can see where things are going, but not so clear that it's going to take away from your pixels. Okay, now if you're going to do 3D, you may want to set X0 as center. You'll find that will make a difference when you go to 3D, but otherwise you won't really notice it. Having done that, you've got all your background set up. It's now time to start to put your props down, and that is done using the model icons across the top of the screen here. Each one of these represents a different class of model, and then there's a couple at the end here that relate to importing models or downloading models, and this final one on the end is grayed out because we're not in 3D mode, and this is only used in 3D mode. The prop icons themselves basically allow you to draw your prop on the screen, and then you configure it using a set of properties. We'll start with what is often the center of most people's displays, which is a mega tree or a tree. Now, these icons are actually triple state icons. You can click them 3 times. The first time you click it, it selects it, and you can drag and drop. You drag down to the right, and it draws one tree. And then if you click again, it's in select mode. If you click on it twice, it goes into multi-drop mode. And then every time you click and drag, it's going to drop another tree. Okay, and it won't stop until you click again on here to stop it. Control Z here, if you click, will undo, and you can undo the dropping of all of those props down. So let's model this tree here that we've got. This is a pixel tree, and we can lay it out and resize it appropriately. Now, when you drop down a tree, like a model like this, it will appear over here in the list. It will show you the start and the end channel and the controller connection, which we'll talk about as well. Down here, you can give it a name. This happens to be the 4th one of these trees, so I would typically call this tree 4. It is a round tree. It's actually not a 360-degree tree because I used strips on it. You can't actually see the back of the tree, so I didn't bother to put pixels there, and people don't see it. So this is actually only a 270-degree tree. So the back of the tree is empty, and if I quickly flick over to 3D mode, you can see here that it's not filled in the back of the tree. But you can make it 360 degrees. It really doesn't matter. Some of the other properties here, the number of strings is really important at the moment. These 3 properties here work together to control the structure of the tree. The way we would recommend you set it is the number of strings is the number of physical connections your tree has back to one of those ports on your controller. So if you've got one really long string of pixels that just zigzags up and down the tree all the way around, I would set this to 1. If you have 3 connections from this tree back to the controller, then I would set this to 3. Now, the tree model inherently assumes that all of the 3 strings are the same length. So, and this is kind of a key point, and it doesn't just apply to the tree. You almost always want to model your element in XLights before you go and build your element in practice. And the reason for that is because XLights, short of the custom model, can't represent every possible way that you could build a tree. It represents a lot of different ways, but not every way. And so if you choose a way that is not a way that XLights can represent, then you will find yourself unable to use the inbuilt models in XLights. Now, you can still build things in custom models, but there are some limitations that you will run into in terms of either visual representation or in terms of ability to generate effects and the like if you go that way. So always build the model first in XLights, get really clear about how XLights expects this model's going to work before you go away and build the tree physically. So in this case, I'm going to actually say that this is 3 strings of lights. Oh, I clicked off it. You do need to press tab or enter. And now you can see it's only got 3 strings of lights going up. But what I do want to do is I actually want to zigzag the lights up and down 6 times. So it will actually be an 18-strand tree. It's only got 3 strings of lights. And if I remember correctly, yeah. Each of the strings, I think, is 108 nodes long, and then each strands per string is 6. So effectively, it's six zigzags. Each string goes up and down 6 times. Each zigzag's actually only 18 pixels. It's not a very big tree. And that gives you a total of 108 nodes per string. So 3 strings of 108 nodes and 6 strands per string is how I represent this particular tree. Now, it doesn't have to be like this. You might say, no, I've got 4 strings, 200 pixels, 4 strands per string, right? So that's 4 connections back to my controller. Each one's got 200 pixels on it, and then each one zigzags up and down 4 times. And that's how you would represent that tree in XLights. Now, one of the things that you can do is you can right-click here and choose the wiring view. And for a tree this dense, of course, there's a lot of numbers on here. So let's go back to my 3, 108 and 6 tree, just because when I do the wiring view, it'll have a few less numbers on it. So you'll see here it shows how the tree is wired together. Now, because this tree is in 3 dimensions, it's a little bit hard to see. But you'll find that the very first node of the tree is actually at the back. Now, this is actually looking at it from the back. So let's look at it from the front. And string 1's actually here on the left. There is another way to look at this, which is the node layout. And the problem with the node layout is the node layout doesn't show the tree's representation as a tree, but it does make everything much clearer in terms of where the nodes are. Now, the key thing that you need to understand here at the moment is that there is this starting location property down here, which is currently set to bottom left. What that means is that at the back of the tree on the left-hand side here is the first pixel of the tree. The nodes then go from there up the tree and then across and down the tree. So the nodes go up the tree and then down the tree, up the tree and then down the tree. And then the 7th string here is going to be the beginning of the 2nd string. The 7th strand is going to be the beginning of the 2nd string, which is going to be node 1 of the 2nd string. And it's going to go up and down. And then the last string is going to be the last 6 strands here around the right-hand side. Now, if that's not how you've actually planning to wire it, maybe it's easier to connect the first pixel to be on the right-hand side here. You just come down here and say, well, actually, we're going to start at the bottom right. And now when we do the node layout, it's going to show that node 1 is over here on the right. So node 1 is now over here on the bottom right. It goes up and down the tree all the way around and finishes at the end over here. So you do need to think about where is my start and end going to be. And most of the models that we'll go through here have these sort of properties that you will want to set to decide how you're going to wire it. Now, if you haven't decided yet whether you're going to start bottom left or bottom right, that's okay. Just leave it as bottom left and you can change it later, right? What you won't be able to do change later is decide that, oh, I actually want it to be in the middle or something. You know, there's obviously only 4 possible start locations here that you're going to be able to choose between. So when you build your tree, for God's sake, choose one of these 4, because changing it later is not going to be easy or necessarily even possible. Now, what else do I want to show here? A couple other things. Now, so this is a RGB pixel tree. Now, you may not be building a pixel tree. You might have a old school AC tree. So let's imagine you've done that. In fact, let's imagine it's a 16-strand dumb tree, and you've spiraled the strings around the tree. Is that possible? Well, sure it is. So it's going to be a round tree, so that's okay. The spiral wraps, we'll set that to 3, which will wrap the strands around the tree rather than, now you can change that. You can make it 4 or 5 or 1 or 2, whatever. In this case, it's going to be an AC prop and we're going to have 16 strings. So in this case, the number of strings is still going to be 16. The nodes per string, because it's AC, doesn't really matter. I can make this 100. I can make this maybe 1,000. Because it's going to be AC lights, it doesn't really matter. The strands per string for an AC tree would typically be 1. What's most important is that I come down here and I make it single color. Now, if this, let's imagine that these were white pixels, I would change this to be white. And when I sequence it, it will show up in white. So yeah, this is now a spiral tree. I think my spiral wraps here at 3 is probably a few too many. Now, the thing you will notice up here from a channel perspective, single color. Doesn't look right. Why does that not look right? $16.51. Why does that not look like? I think I know. I think there's possibly. Oh, would help if I was on the right tree. Okay, not sure why that's wrong. That should be 16 channels, and that's showing as 3 times that. Oh, there we go. That's better. Sorry, I chose the wrong one. I still do think that's possibly a bug. So yeah, so sorry, I've set it to single color. I've set it to white, and what it's using is it's using 16 channels here. So it starts at channel 5,185, and 16 channels beyond that is 5,200. And so you might put that onto a Law 16 channel controller or a Renard 16 channel controller to control that tree. So that's how you would set those sorts of things up. Now, if you've got a flat tree, Flat trees are no harder to set up. You will just choose up here a flat tree or a ribbon tree. The only difference between a ribbon tree is it puts this sort of extra piece at the top because ribbon trees tend to look like that. Otherwise, however, it's exactly the same. You still set the number of strings and the number of strands based on the amount of zigzagging that you've got going on and so forth. So setting up trees is pretty straightforward like that. Other props, and I'm not going to touch on all of them. I'll touch on the most common ones. Arch props. You just drag them out. The red line that appears periodically there shows me when I've actually got the prop flat. With arches, you can move this piece around, you can resize it and so forth. You do get to decide, you can have these arches joined together and it just spreads those nodes out across 3 arches instead of just 1. I generally stick with just the 1. It gives me a little bit more flexibility. You can set the number of pixels per arch. The lights per node, look, I generally leave this as 1. If you've got 12-volt strip and you've got 3 LEDs per node, some people will put a 3 in here. I really wouldn't bother. You can, if you are going with multiple arches, you can add a gap between the arches, which will create a bit of a gap if that's how they actually look. But again, I would typically stay with 1 arch and then just drop multiple if that's what I need. That's probably the main things for arches. Candy canes are similar. They're exactly the same sort of prop. You can make them sticks here, so just vertical lines rather than candy canes. If you're doing pixel stakes, you can use the sticks here as one way of doing it. Most of these things all have a start location, green square or blue square. Some of them have these alternate nodes. That changes the layout. So if you're doing candy canes in particular, if you run the pixels from the top to the bottom, then you'll typically have to run a piece of wire back down to the bottom and then across to the next candy cane. Some people like to wire their candy canes such that instead of just running their pixels up the candy cane, what they'll do is they'll kind of leapfrog their way up and then leapfrog their way back down. And that way they don't end up with having to run any extra wire along the way. The alternate nodes checkbox here basically does that. And so if you look at the node layout that's created with these candy canes, you'll notice that node 1 jumps over node 18. And then it jumps every second one on the way up, and then it uses every second one on the way back. So the first and the last node on the string on this cane happen to be right down near the bottom, which makes it a lot easier in practice to wire and build it. There's several props that support that sort of stuff. It's also supported on things like the icicles as well to save yourself some time if that's what you want to do. If you're doing candy canes and you want to flip them the other way, that's what the reverse does. It just flips the cane around the other way if that's what you want. So that's our candy canes. The channel block model, the only reason I'll represent the channel block model is if you're coming from an older version of Lightorama or a really old version of Vixen, and you're really used to just sequencing your AC lights as channels, and this whole drawing pictures of props, etc., seems like a totally unnecessary distraction. You can use the channel block model just to create a block of channels, which you then will be able to drop effects onto and sequence, etc. But that's really why the channel block model's there. We'll come back to the custom model. The image model can be kind of useful if you've got things like blow-ups and maybe your computer controlling the light inside the blow up and you want to light the blow up. I have that. I have a big Santa Claus that sits over here on the right hand side, and I can turn the light on inside him on and off. This, much like the background, allows you to select an image. In this case, the image is not in my show folder, which of course is a no-no. So we're going to come back here. And we're going to grab some of these images here, and we're going to pop them into our images folder. And that way we can select our blow up Santa here. And so now I've got a blow up Santa, and we can actually sequence him, and the image will get brighter or darker depending on whether you've turned the lights on or not. I could have used a higher resolution image, but whatever. Icicles, you can just drag and drop those along your house. Now, if you're actually using these icicles here, you will potentially want to drag them down so that they look like they're actually hanging down with gravity. Again, with icicles, you do have the alternate node pattern. You also have the drop pattern. And, one thing that people don't always realize is that you can actually do some pretty cool things with this. So for instance, if you've got icicles, but you've got a string of pixels that run across the top, there's nothing to stop you putting multiple ones between the numbers, right, and creating a set of icicles where there is actually, no icicle drops for a couple, and then it drops again. So you can build some pretty complex patterns here by putting the appropriate set of numbers in, or you can just put a 7 and just have straight 7 drop icicles, which can be really useful if you want to display text. 7 drop icicles do text reasonably well. So that's icicles. Matrix, use matrix for pixel matrices, but also for P panels. You can also use it for virtual matrices if you're using a TV or something to sequence onto. To be honest, this is very, very similar to the tree model. You do get to control whether the pixels run up and down or across the model. Which you don't get to control on the tree at the moment. But other than that, you've got strings, nodes, and strands, just like you did on the tree. Again, it assumes that the strings are all the same length. So yeah, don't have, 2 strings of 200 and then one of 100. That is not supported by the matrix model. The thing about the matrix model is it is actually a lot easier to build a matrix as a custom model. A tree can be, particularly a 360 tree, is very hard to build effectively as a custom model. A matrix is not as hard. They do render more slowly, or they're more difficult for XLights to work with. So if you can stick with the built-in models, I suggest that you do so. One thing I haven't touched on, but one of the things that people often do with these matrices. So let me quickly configure the matrix for a couple of different configurations. So let's imagine that this was a pixel matrix. So I might do 3 strings of 600 at 10 strands per string. That would be a valid matrix. That would be 3 connections to my controller, each 600 long, for a total of 1800 pixels. That'd be okay for a 2-inch or a 1-inch spaced pixel matrix. Again, choose your starting location. In a matrix, it's much more common to use any of those corners depending on how you've laid it out. If using a P panel, P panels are kind of special because they kind of work differently. So let's imagine that I have a 2x4, so that would be 64 by 64 in effect. So typically what you would do is you would show that as 64 strings with 64 nodes per string, 1 strand per string. So 64 across, 64 down. And with P panels, you would typically do top left as a starting location. And that would be your 64 by 64 P panel. That's typically how you'd represent it. You typically do a similar thing with a virtual matrix, although you may not do top left, you may do bottom left. It depends. The other thing that you might want to do with matrices and also with trees is you may want to put some singing faces on them, and that's done here rather than in the sequencer. You need to associate a face with that particular model, and so you'd come down to the faces property here. You'd add a face. I don't know. Let's put Santa on it. Now what you need is you need a set of images to represent each of the phonemes. We'll need to make it a matrix face because it's on a matrix. The other sorts of faces you'll use for custom models, we'll come back to those. Now, fortunately, XLights includes or is able to download a whole bunch of images. So if you click on download images here, it goes off and it finds an absolutely massive collection which have been contributed by the community. And so I can come down here, find my Santa, and let's look at my Santas. Yeah, I don't think we want that one. It's pretty high resolution, but yeah, Santa waving, that's pretty good. Aussie Santa. Yeah, I could do that. All right, and then we just click on insert face. And what XLights will do is XLights will go and download all of those images. It will unpack them and it will associate it with the model. And when we come to sequence our singing faces later, it will display that face for us on the matrix. Keep going. Single lines. So single lines is great when you're doing house outlines. You click and drag. Again, you'll want to set the start channel depending on whereabouts you've connected the string back to the controller. I generally like to have my green there, but you can swap it around here. You can set the number of nodes per string. Again, XLights, because you sequence XLights on a model, if let's say I don't really know how many lights I'm going to have here, maybe I haven't bought my lights yet. I don't know how many are going to fit in. I don't know exactly what the spacing is going to be. You can just leave it. I might say, look, I think it's going to be 36, but I can always come back and change it later. And the vast majority of effects will just automatically adapt to changes in the model. You will have to re-render, and we'll come to that in a minute, but you don't necessarily have to get all of this perfect when you're just starting out. You just want a reasonable representation of what you're going to be doing. The alternative to the single line is the polyline. And if you're new to XLights, you've almost certainly struggled with polyline. So what you do is you click once and then you just move your mouse around and it just draws. When you've reached the point where you want to drop the next point, you just click and then you move on again and so on. And so if I want to outline my house here, I can do so just by clicking and dragging. Now, when you're done, you're going to want to press the escape key because that will stop it drawing. You'll see there'll be a post that will get posted during the year from someone who's struggling with how do I stop this damn polyline model, and you'll be able to answer that now. Now, if you're doing a polyline model, almost always I would do individual segments, and you can open it up here and you can come in here and say, look, there's actually 36 nodes here. There's 12 in the next section. The next section is, I don't know, 15. Yeah, there's only 8 across the top, and then there's 60 down the back. So you can lay the number of pixels out in each section of the polyline according to how they are actually done. The other cool thing that you can do with the polyline is you can do this arch here. So what I'll do is I'll come up to the point where it starts to arc around. I'll cut across and I'll come back down again. I'll press escape. I can then come up and click on this section here. And if I right click, I can define a curve, and that gives me these red squares. And if I start pulling these red squares, I can actually curve the pixels around my arch and do all of this as a single polyline, which is good because that's exactly how they're actually defined in reality. So the polyline gives you lots of flexibility, and once you get into 3D, it gives you even more again. Now, the other thing that a polyline can be is icicles. So if I want to do icicles across the top of the point of my house here, pressing escape again, don't forget that. You can come down here and where are we? Drop pattern. So at the moment it's set to 1, but if they were 3, 4, 5 icicles, I can do that. Now, in this case, they automatically drop down to vertically. The polyline model automatically adjusts for gravity. You can also do the alternate drop pattern as well in the node layout here, where as it goes down, it does 1, then 2, then 3, 4, then 5, then 6, then back to 7 and 8 and so forth, again to make that wiring using normal pixels a lot easier rather than having to buy special icicle pixels which cost extra. So yeah, you can do a bunch of things, and of course there's nothing to stop you using the polyline to represent pixel stakes. So if I've got pixel stakes here running down my driveway, right, again I can make this a 10 drop, 200, and if I set that drop pattern to actually -10, they become pixel stakes that go upwards. And again, I can use those alternate pattern, and now I can have a set of pixel stakes running along. So that's the polyline. The spinner, for those that are, see, now that's annoying. How do you stop that? If you right click on a model and click lock, then clicking on the model, you can't accidentally click and drag it. So you can lock your models in place. So with a spinner, you can come in to find the number of arms, the number of nodes per string. Again, there's all sorts of different patterns for how this thing gets wired, including, I think there's also alternate. Typically, most people would wire it from the center, but you might do center alternate clockwise. And if you look at the wiring view for that, you'll see, it's jumped over 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, 7, 8 back. Again, saving yourself from either having to run a piece of wire back and around or jumping across and coming back in. So there's lots of options with those things. Stars are also very common. People like to put stars up on their mega trees and the like. Generally you would use a star model over a custom model, but lots of people do use custom models, but the star model will generally give you better effects and more options. With stars, you can have layers. So you can say this is a 50, 40, 30 star. Don't forget that that's actually now 120 nodes. So make sure that you give it 120 nodes. And you can see that the star model has automatically been built as a layered star. With the star, this star is another one where you need to be really careful about the starting points, because the star actually only supports 2, and not one that I think people might like. One of these days I'll get around to adding it. At the moment, it really only allows you to start it at the top here or at the bottom of the crutch of the star here. It doesn't allow you to start down at the foot of the star, which I imagine many people do when they first create a star without realizing that actually you need to choose one of these start models or start positions. Now, obviously, you can do a custom model and you can put it wherever you damn well please. That's all good. The final thing before we move on from the models, and a time check. I'm about an hour in. Yeah, okay. So the other thing you can do is you can download models. Now, to download the models, you click on download, then you have to click and drag out a box before this dialog will appear. And this dialog here provides you with access to the models from a number of vendors who support the XLights project. So here you have Boscoyo Studio and Gilbert Engineering. It's interesting, no T on it. Wonder if that's my typo or theirs. Most of this data is actually drawn from the vendor's website. So they are able to upload and add models at their own pace. So please don't contact us if there's not a model here. I can't help you with that, but the supplier absolutely can. There's also things like the share drive where also a number of models are put. Now you can come in here and you can find, any of the models. You'll typically get an image of the model. It might give you a bunch of information about the model, including, number of pixels. They may make a suggestion about the minimum pixel spacing. They may tell you that it should be bullets or it can be square nodes. Again, all of this information is maintained by the vendor. They may have the dimensions of the prop, etc. So you can basically, this is a virtual shopping center where you can go around and shop for things. When you click on insert model, it will go and create the model here in XLights, all ready to sequence. Not only that, so remember I'm clicking, click and drag. The other thing that it will do is if you've got singing elements, let's go to Gilbert Engineering, see if he's got any singing elements here. He does. I don't know. Let's do his singing bulb. If we insert that, you can see here's his singing. Now, these are almost always custom models. They're not strictly custom models, but most of them will be. The reason I brought that down is because ideally, they will have included the actual face definition in the model so that you don't need to do it. And here it is. So what they have done is they've gone through and specified the outline of the face, the various different mouths. I don't know whether you can see that some of these pixels are more lit up than others. But they've gone to the trouble of defining, which pixels should be lit up for each of the mouth shapes. So when it comes time to sequence the bulb, sequencing a singing face is really, really easy. Beware, though, if you're going to do that, that you must follow the wiring view. So the wiring view, which is available here, shows you how they've wired the prop, where they started, where they jumped to, etc. If you want to use their singing face definition, you must also use the wiring view. Now, by default, the wiring view is always the reverse view. Why do we do that? Well, because the vast majority of people push the pixels in from the back of the prop, not from the front of the prop. And so we figure that the clearest or the most obvious way to do this is to do it from the back. Now, you can switch it to the front if you really want to. You can also make it light colored so that you can print it out and have a piece of paper to reference while you're pushing the pixels. So all of those things are possible. There is also a print thing here to print it. You can also export it, and then you can use some other program to print it. So for really large props, sometimes that's helpful. So definitely take advantage of the wiring view. This thing has significantly reduced the number of errors that I make when I make my props. Okay, so that's the bulk of the types of models and installing those models. Now, one of the things that we haven't touched on at all so far is this controller connection section. And that's where I want to go next, because you don't need to fill the controller connection in. It is entirely optional. But if you want to take advantage of XLights' ability to configure your controllers, the controller connection is where you're basically telling XLights how to set your prop up on your controller. But in order to do that, we need to have some controllers defined. So let's go over and define some controllers. Now, there's really two main types of controllers: USB controllers and Ethernet controllers. Have I missed any questions? Everyone's very quiet. Maybe no one's here and I've been talking for hours. We are here. Okay. Oh, all good. Have I missed any important questions? I really wish people would interrupt me if they have a question. It would be so much more efficient. All right. So look, I will go on, and if someone really has a question, please speak up. I'm more than happy to take interruptions and answer questions to make sure that I'm not losing you along the way. All right. So there's two types of controllers. If you're going to run your show off a computer, and if you've got a RS485, a Law type controller or a Renard type controller, and you're going to be running it off a computer, even if you're only just going to be doing that during testing, you'll be wanting to add one of these USB controllers, because this is a USB or serial connected controller to XLights. Right now, if you're planning to run your law controller hanging off the back end of a Falcon or the back end of a FPP device, you are not going to add it as a USB device, right? You are going to be adding it as an Ethernet device when we get to that in a minute. But if I was connecting my law box directly to my computer and running it off my computer, I would go and define it here. Now, off to the right-hand side here, and this has changed since a lot of my beginner videos from prior years, all of the properties for your controller are now right here on the side here. I would typically go over here and give it a name, and let's imagine I've just got a 16-channel law controller, and so I'm just going to define it this way. I can give it a description. Yeah, look, yeah, this one is under the pine tree. Yeah, you can put anything you like in the description, just to give you something to refer back to. You can give it an identity. You don't need to give it an identity. With these sorts of controllers, I typically like to give it a really high number, keep it away from any universes that I might use. You can refer to this ID when you're assigning props to the controller. And that's the only reason that it's there. I would not typically auto size these things. I can come in and describe the controller. This is not going to do a hell of a lot. I can choose the model of the controller. Now, not all controllers are in here. If they're not in here, just leave them blank. It's not a big deal. And to be honest, this is not going to do a great deal at this point other than describe things. You would set the protocol. For a law controller, I would typically run it as DMX. You could change it to the law protocol. XLights is happy to run the law protocol. There's even a law optimized, which is a slightly more efficient version that you would want to use if you were trying to run, I don't know, something like a Pixie 4 or something. Generally, I would not recommend Pixie controllers, but you could drive a Pixie 4 from XLights. Once you get to the Pixie 16s, XLights will struggle to sufficiently optimize the communication to make those things work well, unless you keep your pixel counts really low. And then you'd set the number of channels, and I typically leave this at 512 because there's no reason not to. But you could lower it down and say, well, it's just one controller. I just want 16 channels here. And that's how you could set up a USB attached law device. Now, if you were adding a Ethernet type controller, so this would be something like a Falcon controller, an Alpha Pix, a Hinks Pix, a Cult controller, all of those things are Ethernet type controllers. You would click on the Ethernet button here. By default, it sets it up as an E131 device. So in this case here, let's call this my Falcon controller. To try and remember, we'll set the IP address. This Falcon control is actually turned on at the moment. Up here, I would set my vendor. So I'd come down to Falcon. This is an F16 V3, and I have no expansion board on it. And you should set all three properties if they're available, because it will affect how the rest of these properties work. With a Falcon controller, I'm definitely a fan of auto layout models, auto size, and giving it full control. And you click these three check boxes, and at this point, XLights feels like it has total control over that controller. It will configure it as it wishes and as it needs to make that controller work. You can see right now, it's currently set as E131 with the Falcons. If you were driving it off a computer, you could consider ZCPP. If you're going to be driving this off a Falcon Pi player, you'll probably want it to be E131. If you're going to hide it, the proxies, I'm not going to go into FPP proxies. I'm sure there's other things that are being covered here where people are hiding their Falcons behind FPP proxies. I'm not going to touch that in a 101 course. That's another thing. And then you'd want to set a start universe. I like to start my universes on 100 boundaries, just because, It just keeps them nice and distinct, and I can associate those universes. Anything in the hundreds is going to be on my Falcon. It's just a little easier to do. You'll notice that you can't set the universe count and you can't set the channels per universe or anything. And the reason I can't do that is because I've given XLights full control and I've asked XLights to do the auto sizing. If you want to manually control the controller, and if you're using a less capable controller, one that doesn't have things like virtual strings and the like, you're not going to want to do this auto size and full control. In fact, you won't even get full control. You may not even want to do auto layout models, in which case you can control the number of universes. So I can come down here and say, I want 16 universes. And I can even come in and set the individual sizes of those universes if I so wanted to do so. I don't. So if, if this is a SAN devices, I would probably do it manually and set it up like this and decide the universe sizes and so forth. But being a Falcon, I tend to just give it full control. Okay. Now, if I was running my law controller off my Falcon controller, I would still define my Falcon controller exactly like this, and I would delete this row here. You do not need to show anything on here for the law controller that's hanging off the Falcon. It's just part of the Falcon. You don't have to separate it. Okay. When it's red here, don't forget you're going to want to save from time to time. Now, with giving auto layout models, auto size, and setting all of these settings, etc., you do get access to the visualizer. And this is new this year, and it gives us the ability to use drag and drop configuration to configure all of the props onto these models, onto this controller. So I'm not going to set it all up here. My trees are all 16 strings. Okay, so the number of strings here is going to make a difference. So because I've got this tree set up with 16 strings, if I drag and drop this tree across and drop it onto port 1, notice how it consumes all 16 ports on the controller. And that's because the number of strings has been read as the number of ports that I'm using. So if I didn't want it to be that way, let's do this one here. This one here. Let's set this to 4 by 200 by 4, and this is tree 2. So if I come back to the visualizer here and go to tree 2 and drag and drop it, you'll notice that it's now only using 4 strings, and each string is 200 long. Okay, these tooltips here give you all the settings. If you were then going to go and manually configure your controller, it's giving you all the details that you might need to configure the controller. Port 2 should start at universe 101, channel 91, and it should be 600 channels long or 200 pixels. That's everything I would need to manually configure, let's say, a SAN devices controller, but I can also push the configuration. Let's say my star, I have a star here somewhere, don't I? There it is. Let's say I wanted to put that at the end of the last string on the tree. Well, I can do that. I can just drag and drop it over here, and now the star is on the end of port 4 after the tree. My polylines, I can drag and drop them onto other ports. Now, one of these trees was a dumb tree. Protocol. Start channel, end channel. Okay, so this one here is a dumb tree. So let's imagine I'm going to put that onto my serial port. So I can put it here down, and it's now converted it to DMX protocol. It's set it to channel 1. Now I can change that. I can say, actually, it's not channel 1. Let's say it was on channel 17, my second law controller. Maybe I chain 2 together. I could do that here as well. You can also do things like you can come in here and play with brightness. So I can come in here and set the brightness. I'm not going to go into things like smart remotes and the like, but all of those sorts of things are configurable here as well. So this is how you would lay out your props on your models. sorry, your models onto your controller.
Hey, Keith, everybody's mics were previously muted, but now they have been where you can unmute them. So if you have questions, you can hit your mute and unmute button and ask Keith a question.
Hello, Keith from Las Vegas. I have a question about, let's say, spinners. I noticed on the arches where you could add several arches to one universe or one port. Can you do the same thing with spinners and have it show up that way in the model?
So what you can't just come into the spinner and say, I want 3 spinners, but you can create 3 spinners using cut and paste.
Right.
And then come back into the visualizer. There's my spinner there, and I can just drag and drop those spinners on. And so now they're chained together.
Okay. Well, hey, that was a question. I've been trying to figure that out for a while. So,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. Every now and then you might receive error messages down here that will be warning you about problems with your configuration. Pay attention to them. Those things will be relevant if you try to upload to the controller. It's telling you that you have an issue of some sort that you need to fix. We don't, so we're all good. Okay, whenever you play with the visualizer, always click save here and save here because it does change settings in both locations. In fact, let's look at that. So if we come to our tree here, which we put onto port 1, you'll notice down here that the controller connection properties have been updated, as have the controller connection properties, which are also displayed here in this column. So it has set the port number to 1, which is the port that we put it onto. In fact, if I change that here to 12 and go back to the visualizer, you'll see the tree has been moved down onto port 12. So those two things are related. They're not independent. Let's go back to port 1. The only the challenge with doing it here, of course, is you don't get all of the cool tools that the visualizer gives you in terms of making sure that things are appropriately chained together. You have to do all of that manually, which is why the visualizer is such a good idea to use if you can get away with it. The other thing you'll notice is that it has expanded the number of universes out to 10 because that's how many universes it needs to represent the props that we have put onto the tree, onto that controller so far. Now, the other settings that have been set here is it has set the protocol. Now, there are these other properties down here. Now, these are all properties that you would be familiar with if you had a controller and you'd brought up the UI for that controller. So let's quickly do that. If you were coming in here and setting this controller up manually, this is not the configuration, obviously. You have all of these settings like brightness and the like that you can set. If you set these settings here in XLights, it will actually change that configuration on the controller. So these things don't change anything in XLights. They change what gets pushed to the controller. So if I want to tell the Falcon controller that I want this model to be at 30% brightness, I can set that this way. And when I upload this to the controller, it will set the model on the controller to 30%. Now, you can also set the brightness of the model up here using the dimming curve. The disadvantage of dimming curves is if you ever want to change the value, you have to go back and re-render and resave. And if you're using the Falcon Pi player, re-upload all of your sequences for that brightness to take effect. Whereas if you set the brightness here, you just have to re-upload the configuration to the controller and the brightness will be changed on every sequence for all time regardless. So yeah, you can override a variety of properties here. The most common ones are brightness. Some people will do null pixels every now and then. Sometimes color order. Color order is a little bit different. I would generally do color order down here. Here you can set different color orders down here as well. I would generally do that in XLights rather than doing it on the controller because you don't have a tendency to want to dynamically change the color order of your pixels on your prop, but changing brightness dynamically is something that's much more common. So it makes sense to do it here, and null pixels can only be done on the controller. So setting that here is really the only option. I don't generally do reversing of pixels or zigzags on the controller, etc. Most of that is done here in XLights, where it's easy to do. Now, one of the things that we can do here is if we double click on a row here, we can open up our controller configuration. It just opens up our controller. And we can also do the upload to the controller. Now with the Falcons, you get an upload of the input and the output. The input will change the E131 ArtNet. So it's currently set up to listen to universes 1 to 10. And if I upload the input here and it says down here, Falcon input upload complete, and I go back to here, you can see that it's now got universes 100 through 109. And if I go to my string ports and look at my string ports, you can see it's got a whole bunch of random stuff on it, someone else's configuration that I've been testing. If I click on upload output, it does that, upload complete. And if I go back here and do the string ports again, you can see that it has uploaded the configuration that we had there. It's spread my tree across the 4 ports. You'll notice that the 4th port is a bit longer because it's got the star on the end of it. Now it only shows the description of the first model on each port, but that's okay. These things here, yeah, they're red. Yeah, they're invalid. Yeah, if you're anally retentive, I guess you could change that to be 100 and get rid of the red. The reality is the Falcon doesn't care. So I just leave it. In fact, I kind of like it being red. It shows me they're not in use. So that's how easy it is to configure your controller. And that guarantees that your controller is now absolutely configured correctly for XLights. And if I turn on output to lights and I had pixels on that controller, they'll work, because we know it's configured correctly. You'll notice the brightness has been uploaded as 30% as well, just like that setting that we put in XLights. It really is that easy to configure controllers. Now, the controller upload supports a number of different controllers. Things like the Falcon controller and the Culp controller are really, really easy to do because they have all of these concepts of virtual strings and the like. Some of the other controllers have got greater constraints. So things like the Sand Devices controller has got a number of constraints that you need to think about. XLights cannot resolve for those. You need to make sure that whatever you do remains within the rules that the control or the constraints that the controller puts in place. XLights will often warn you about things where you've violated rules that XLights knows you violated, but it doesn't do everything. So those controllers are inherently going to be just that little bit harder to configure. You're going to need to know a little bit more to get it right. But yeah, that's uploading to the controllers. Now, I am going to spend a couple of seconds just to flick through my list to see if there's anything I missed. So we haven't talked about custom models yet, so I do need to talk a little bit about custom models. But other than that, sorry, there are a couple of things. So, so one of the really useful things up here is being able to click on the columns. So you can sort these by the name, but I actually like to sort them by the start channels from time to time because it can be a lot easier to understand how your models have been laid out. So take advantage of clicking on the columns, particularly if you're suffering things like overlapping channels and the like. Clicking on those can really help. Let's quickly look at custom models. So these 2 props here are custom models that have been downloaded. There's a couple of things about custom models that you need to be aware of. You can actually have multiple strings on a custom model. It doesn't have to be just all one string of lights. Not such a big deal for these props, which are only, this is 150 nodes. But let's imagine I did decide to break this up into a string of 100 and a string of 50. You can do that using the custom models by setting the number of strings to 2. And then if you say, I want individual start nodes, by default, it splits it in half. but I can say that node 101 is actually the first node on the second string. And that allows me to have, one string connected to one port with 100 nodes and another string connected to another port with 50 nodes. So the custom model does allow you to upload potentially some odd configurations to the controller, and that will go up just fine. To change the actual layout of the pixels, you need to go into the model data, which you click on the ellipsis here. And this gives you a grid in which you can change, you can shrink this, and you can do, you can add numbers and so forth. These can actually be 3D. I'm not going to go there, but you can actually create 3D custom models as well. Down here, you can sort of move around. If you click on a node here, it will highlight in pink the node that you clicked on, so you can orientate yourself around the model. One of these nodes will be in yellow. There it is, the one at the bottom. There he is, right there. That's the first node. So yeah, so you can see where the first node is on the model and things like that. Now, actually doing the model is not that hard. There's a couple of ways that you can do it. There's a website. David Peace has got a website where he's got a custom model builder, which is a little bit less grid based than this one. You can build them using a tool like that, or you can build them in XLights using a grid. Let's create a new one rather than mucking up that one. So up here, you need to set a width and a height. Now you can change these later, so you can just set it to an arbitrary number. You can bring in a background image. So I don't know, let's bring in this reindeer. And you can dim that image down so that you can see through it. And, ideally you'd have actually already built the prop and you'd be able to see the pixels, and it would be as simple as that. You can then come over to here and say, oh, I'm going to start the numbering here, and I can type the number 1 and then the number 2 and so forth, and do it that way. If this is a dumb prop, let's imagine this is one of those wireframe reindeers and it's just got a bunch of old school LEDs on it. You can do that as well. Just make sure you just put the same number everywhere, and each one of those will be basically the same light. That's also possible. If you don't want to be typing all of those numbers in, you can come over here and turn auto numbering on. And at this point here, I can just go around and just click, and wherever I click, it drops another 1 down. If you're going to do pixels, you'll probably want to do the auto increment. So you'll start with 1, and then every time you drop it down, it will increment the number by 1. If you screw up and realize, oh, actually, damn, I clicked that twice, so now I'm missing 9, just come back to here, change that to 9 and click again, and you can continue on from there. It's all well and good. All right, and you just quickly run around your prop. That's the worst custom model prop I've ever seen. All right, 44 pixels, all good. Now, the other thing you can do if you suddenly realize that you've actually wired that backwards, if you right click over here, there's actually a huge number of tools for optimizing this thing. So you can do things like reverse the pixels. So now this is 1 and it goes backwards around. You can also shift them. So let's imagine that actually this one here is pixel 1, not pixel 6. So I can come in here and say, I want to shift everything by 6 pixels. Well, that went the wrong way. That wasn't good. So let's shift it back by -12. That was 1 too many. Let's shift it by 1. There we are. Now it starts 1 there. Perfect. So I don't have to go back and renumber it all manually. There's a number of tools here. Things like shrinking unused space, and you can rotate the model around. I can flip it. I can horizontally flip it. So now it's facing the other way. So if you get the candy cane model, people say, well, I can only find the candy cane model in left. Well, you can come in here and just flip it, and now it's a right facing model. And there's what do you know? It even slightly looks like a reindeer. There's also a tool that allows you to use a video, and Jeff at Canispata Christmas recently did a couple of videos showing that. And there's also a couple of videos I have out there showing how to use a video camera and your pixel setup and video your prop and have XLights actually generate the custom model for you. So that's also possible. The other thing I wanted to show was check sequence. Now, check sequence sounds like it's all to do with building a sequence, but check sequence also checks all of your layouts and your configurations. And I strongly encourage new users to get familiar with it, because check sequence is essentially your expert on hand all the time. And what it will do is it will do a quick run through of your entire setup and highlight anything that seems to be unusual or unexpected. It has two types of situations. It has errors and warnings. Errors are things that we cannot think of any possible reason why you would have it set up that way, and it's almost certainly wrong. If it's a warning, that means that there are valid reasons why you might have set it up that way, but we also find that people commonly don't mean to set it up that way. And so we warn you that this is true, and then you need to look at it and say, yeah, that was intentional. I really meant to do that. Or actually, no, that's a problem. I didn't mean that to happen. I need to go and fix it. So get familiar with this. The way it works is it effectively runs a whole bunch of tests, and based on those tests, it'll either tell you that there's no problems found, or it will give you warnings or errors saying there's a problem here, you really need to do something about it. So for instance, here I've got a model, my matrix, which starts on the controller, the Falcon controller, but it ends on a channel which is actually not on that controller. Now, that's because I actually never bothered to set the start channels on the matrix. And so it's largely set to a random number. And the fact that it's on the Falcon is incidental. And this just represents that I haven't actually properly set my matrix up yet. Tree 4 is similar. There it's set up on the law controller, right? But it ends again on something that's not on a controller. Again, I haven't configured it, so it's not surprising it's a mess. I've also got lots of overlapping channels. Now, what does overlapping channels mean? Overlapping channels just means that I have multiple props which happen to be pointing at the same channels on my controllers. So that means they're going to interfere with one another if I drop effects on those two models. Typically not something you want. There are some circumstances where it's actually really valid and even desirable to have overlapping models. And, you know, if you go and look at some videos around shadow models and explain some of those reasons, but that's not a 101 topic. So we're not going to go there. Typically, if you're doing a brand new display, you probably shouldn't have any overlaps, and you should probably read these warnings as errors. The rest seems to be pretty good. Definitely familiarize yourself with those. If you have problems, if you have things and you can't work out what's wrong, post a question, hop into Zoom. You would be astonished how often there are people in the XLights Zoom room, and come August, September, there will basically be people in there 24 hours a day up until Christmas, and they're always willing to help you out and help you get things sorted. There's one other cool tip, because I like to throw something in for everyone who's maybe not new to this, but a lot of people don't realize that there's under appearance here, there is this thing called tag color. And you can actually tag your models with a color. So I'm going to take my Nutcracker here and make him red. And I'll show you in a minute what that does and why that can be kind of useful, particularly in a large display. So the one thing we haven't done here is we haven't talked about groups. So let's imagine I want to create a group of my spinners, because sometimes you want to sequence not them as individual props, but actually as a group of props. Now, there's a couple of ways that you can do this. One way is you can just highlight them all here and go create group and say, that's my spinners. And it will create this group up here. And when you click on it, you can see there are my spinners. It's also how you would create a whole house view, a whole house view. You'd go select everything, create group. Right. Everyone wants a whole house model because I don't care how fancy a sequencer you are. Everyone wants to drop the butterfly on the whole house at some time. So that gives you your whole house group. Here's my spinners group. And then obviously now each of these groups gives you something different that you can sequence on. And so instead of sequencing on the individual props, we're going to sequence on everything. Now I typically would have, when I do my whole house, I would typically leave my AC elements out of my whole house. Most whole house sequencing is done with pixels, not with AC props. But you know, you can, it's just, it's not commonly done. The other thing with groups is it does have this red cross in the middle showing you where the center of the group is. So if I was to, when we get into sequencing, if I was to drop a pinwheel on, which will have its center here, that's where the center would be. You can change that center. So you can come down here and say that actually, I want to move that center. Let's say I want the center to be in the middle of this, this pixel tree. That was a incredibly good guess. I had no idea that was 600. This is on a scale of about 1,000. And then I want to move it up a bit. So again, I'm probably going to want to go about 200 up. Oh, maybe 3. There you go. So that's roughly the center of my pixel tree. So if I use this group and I drop a pinwheel on it later, you'll see that it will center my pinwheel there. And that can be really useful, particularly when you're doing things like importing sequences from other people, and maybe your house is not symmetrical. Mine's not. I actually have a pixel tree that sits in the middle of the arch here, and I like the center of my display to be there so that when I drop effects on it, everything seems to come out of the middle of the pixel tree. The only other thing, one final thing before we actually move on to sequencing, how much time have I got left? Anyone know?
You got about 45 minutes, Keith.
Oh, bloody hell. Okay. All right. The other thing to pay attention to is export models. Export models will create a CSV file, which basically lists all of the details of all of your models. If you're the sort of person who keeps a spreadsheet of all of your props and where their start channels are and everything else, well, this spreadsheet is for you. Because this spreadsheet, which is down here, basically has a list of all of my models, all of my groups, all of my start channels, my string counts. You know, it tells me exactly which controller they're on. It tells me what their start channels are in the various formats. It even tells me how big the buffers are that it's going to draw onto. Yeah, everything that you could possibly want to know about both your models and your controllers down here. So, you know, it has all the details about the universes, their absolute start channels, etc. You're going to want to lay your hands on one of those, and you know, you may use that as a starting point for your spreadsheet if you still want to use one to maintain your show. All right, let's talk sequencing in 45 minutes. That's easy. To create a sequence, we click on the yellow icon up here. You'll want a musical or an animation. If you're going to do a musical, you'll need to choose an audio file. I'm going to just use this one. This is now this audio file. This can go on YouTube. They're not going to complain about this. This is license-free audio. Let me quickly stop share, reshare. Share computer sound. All right. If you're going to share computer sound, always set it to very quiet. I assume you can hear that. All right. So when you create a musical sequence, you'll get the waveform up here and the timing here. If you created an animation, you would not have a waveform here. And by default, it would be 30 seconds. If you need to change the length of your sequence, go into the sequence settings here. And if it's an animation, you can change the length here. So if you want 5 minutes, you can change it to 300. It's fine. The first thing I would do when I'm sequencing is always create timing tracks. To do that, you would go into here, right click on that new timing and create a new timing track. Because I've got the Vamp plugins, I've got all of the Vamp things here. And so I can use the Vamp plugins to generate a beat track, which will analyze the audio and go and create a beat track based on what it can see. The other one that can sometimes be useful is the note onsets. So you can see that, you know, when the notes thin out, this thins out as well. You know, this is like unscrambling the egg. You know, it will do a job. It won't necessarily do a perfect job, but you can always come in and adjust these things accordingly. You can hold the control key down and move your mouse wheel. You can zoom in and you can move things around if you so need to, but this will do for now. If you're doing lyric tracks, I'm not going to go into singing faces a great deal other than to, you know, quickly show how that would be done. So if I create this, if I select the new timing here, if I highlight a section of the waveform and press the T key, I get a timing track. If I shift double click on it, I can put in words. And you know, you can use this just to label sections. So some people will like to go in and label the chorus of the song or label the first verse or whatever. If you're doing lyric tracks, you'll obviously put the lyrics of the song in using this. You can then do things like break things down. This will break things down from the phrases into words, and then I can break this down into the phonemes, and then we can use our singing faces to sing those things. I'm going to do this. This will take a little while, but we can talk while it happens. And so you can create timing tracks for singing faces as well. There are several other timing track types. There's timing tracks for pianos. There's timing tracks for states and things like that. But again, I'm not going to get into all of those. Down the left-hand side here, of course, you have all of your models. They seem like they're in somewhat of a random order. You can control the order here. And you do that by right-clicking here and doing Edit Display Elements. This order down here is the order that things are in. You can drag and drop these things around if you just want to move things, but you can also right click and there's a bunch of sort options here. So I think probably the best one is by name, but groups at top by size. What that does is it puts your biggest groups at the top. The whole house has the most models in it, so it's going to be at the top, then the spinners, and then all of the models. And these things are alphabetical, which will make them easier to find. You can see that the toy soldier, which we set that red tag color to, has been tagged with a red color. So if you've got a lot of props, you might want to go in and tag all of your stars with one color or whatever. I find this can really make it a lot quicker to find models when I'm scanning the list. Which is quite useful. When it comes time to render, things are rendered from top to bottom. But when you add layers to a model, which you can do by inserting layers, those layers are rendered from bottom to top. So it's like you paint this bottom layer of paint, then this layer, but the models are actually generated top to bottom. And what that means is, and this is one of the reasons why you put models at the top here, if I was to throw a butterfly on the whole house, but I was to come down and put a fire effect on my matrix, candle effect, sorry, on the matrix, you'll notice down here that the candle is overriding the butterfly. When the butterfly was there, the butterfly was all over the matrix. But because I've put the candle down here below it, the candle is overriding the butterfly. And that's because it sits below it on the list. If I was to take the whole house and move the whole house to the bottom, then it wouldn't matter what I put on any of these things up here. Because this butterfly sets the color of every pixel, it will hide everything else. And so that's why you generally use this sort of model ordering. There may be times when you choose to do it differently, but that's generally how you would do things. The effects themselves, someone going to ask a question? No? All right. The effects themselves are all across the top here. And as you saw, the easiest way is just to click and drag them down. The effects have got a huge number of settings, and this is where XLights can get very confusing very quickly with all of these settings that you've got to worry about. So let's do a quick walkthrough of them. We'll do the common ones, which are common across all effects, and explain what they do. And then we'll come back and we might dwell on just a couple of the key effects. There are a bunch of videos out there that people have made describing some of the effects, at least, which are the advanced ones. So in terms of the color panel, so the color panel is all about controlling the colors of the effect. So if I put a bars effect on the whole house, this lets me decide the colors. So right now the colors are white and red. I can add green into it. I can add blue into it. Okay, just by selecting the colors. Now you can also select gradients, and you do that by right clicking on these things, and you can get into a gradient editor and you can start putting rainbow type colors on it as well. If I go down and put that, sorry, use the keyboard, up arrows and down arrows to move them. So if I put this onto my matrix here, because matrix is always the best way to see effects, you can see that this second color is actually changing over time. And that's because I've got this color gradient. You can also change it to be a gradient across ways or down ways or left or right and so forth. So you can set colors. You've also got things like control over the brightness. You can add in sparkles. You can even change the color. You can even have the number of sparkles reflect changes in the music. So when the music's really quiet, you'll have very few sparkles or lots more sparkles. All of those sorts of things are possible. The layer blending screen, you really only use the layer blending screen if you are using multiple layers. So if you're using multiple layers and you want to blend effects together across multiple layers, and again, given the time, I'm not going to go through that, you're going to want to be using this panel here. This also lets you do things like freeze effects and things like that. The layer setting model is a little bit more important. The layer setting model allows you to do things like control subbuffers. So I can come in here and say that I just want this on the middle third. And so what it's done is it's taken my bar effect and it's constrained it to be just the middle third of my matrix. And that means I can put something else on the other side of my matrix. Right. You know, I can put a butterfly or something on a different layer. So I could insert a layer below. I could throw my butterfly down. Right, which is currently all the way across the model, but I could come into that and put it onto the left third. So now I've got a butterfly and the bars on the model at the same time. The other thing that you can do is you can control the render style. The render style controls the shape of the buffer. And there's a whole video that was made, I think last September, which goes through all of the models and all of the buffer shapes. If you're a beginner, you're probably going to stick largely with the default, but understand that there's a lot of power that hides behind this buffer shape. In the case of a matrix, it's not that interesting, but once you get to custom models and groups, the number of options around the buffer starts to expand dramatically, and this can significantly change the way things work. So for instance, if I wanted to put a bar effect on my spinners, okay, on a group, that's probably not what I want. But what I can do is I can say per model default, and now it's dropping the bar effect like I dropped it onto each one of those. And if I change this to be left, right, and I increase the cycles, my spinners are now spinning. Maybe a little bit too fast, but my spinners are now spinning. So yeah, the buffer control up here is incredibly powerful. Blur can be useful. It can create some interesting effects. Just be careful with it. It can get very slow if you start to go to very high blur amounts. Okay, so these panels exist across all of the effects. They generally work with most of the effects. There are some options that only work with certain, but most of it will work with everything. Let's quickly talk to the effects themselves. I'm not going to show all of the properties. Each of the effects generally do have a set of properties. You know, so a set of properties here that let you control things. Like you can turn an on effect into a fade. So it starts on and then it fades off. You know, a multi-fade where it flashes on and off. Every effect has got some sort of properties associated with it. The bars effect is obviously really useful on, you know, single lines, particularly if you set it to left or right, and it, you know, you get that sort of moving line effect across things. Candle effect really only useful in maybe something like a pixel in a pumpkin at Halloween, maybe. Color wash effect can always be a useful background effect. Always a useful effect. Curtain is often used for reveals. Let's go back to our matrix. Sorry. Very popular for reveals because basically it slides back, particularly if you get rid of the swag and improve the speed. You can use it as a reveal and use it as a mask or something over another prop. So quite popular. The face effect, you'll need the face effect when it comes time to put faces on a matrix. You'll need to choose your face definition. And your timing track. So there he is, and he will sing. You can see his mouth moving quite slowly. Resolution is often an issue with matrix images. You want to pick an image that's somewhat close to the resolution of your matrix. Otherwise, you'll get a lot of this blockiness going on. If that happens, I suggest you take the image out, use some sort of image software, get an image that's much closer to your resolution that you're happy with, clean up all the artifacts, and then add them back in. But that's how simple it is to do singing faces. Once you've got a lyric track in place, you just drop down the face effect and off it goes. The fill effect is kind of interesting. The fill effect is kind of interesting because it's effectively like the curtain effect, but you actually get control over the position of where it's at. Of course, this one just goes up and down. If you want to go left and right, you will want to come over to the transformations here and rotate it so that now it moves left to right, and that just rotates the buffer. So if you've got something that you need to rotate, try one of these transformations up here to get what you want. The other thing that this shows you is that the value of, the problem with this is you can set the position, but it just holds the value. What if I want this to move over time? What if I want it to pop up and then go away again over the course of the sequence? How do you do that? Well, that's where these value curves come in. And so one of the things that most people won't have here, but if you go up to View, to Windows, there's actually a value curves dialog. And if you bring it up, it will actually bring up here a list of all of the value curves that you've currently got in the library. And you can actually come up here and say, drag and drop a value curve down and drop it down here. And so now I've got this effect which goes up and then back down again. And the value curve is what's controlling it. If I want to zigzag it around the middle, I can use the zigzag value curve there. All right. Really as simple as doing all of that. If I want to get rid of it, I can just drag and drop it. You can also click on the button and manually configure your value curves, and create custom curves. All of that sort of stuff's possible. I'm not going to show you how to do that. That's something that's a more advanced topic. But understand that just because there is a setting here, many of them offer you the ability to change the value of the setting over time, and that can create some really interesting effects, a lot more dynamic effects. Fire effects, pretty straightforward. It's just fire. The garlands, I like garlands because it's like, things dropping down. So you can fill a model up. So as you go up to a crescendo, filling your tree up using a garland effect can be a really powerful technique. We'll skip over. Lines is for those people that grew up in the 80s with Microsoft Windows 3.0 and had that as their screensaver. The marquee is really useful for outlining, tune to signs and things like that. The marquee can also be useful on single lines and polylines because it does a really good job of that chasing effect. So always popular having that on that. The morph effect is extremely powerful. The morph effect, basically, it looks just like a wipe. It's not that interesting. The thing about the morph effect is down here in the effect assist, which in this case pops up automatically, allows you to control the area that it fills. And so if you want a zigzag, a diagonal swipe across your model, you can do that using the morph effect. Okay, you can also move it around, a whole bunch of things that you can do down here. So yeah, the morph effect, it looks kind of innocent when you first drop it, but it's a very powerful effect. The music effect, very unpopular effect, but for beginners, it's an auto sequencer type effect. You can set the number of bars that you want. And what it's actually doing is it's not looking great on this matrix. It would look better on a tree. Actually, I think that's it. I need to expand this out, the notes. So what it's actually doing is it's analyzing the music, and then based on the presence of various notes and how loud they are, it's basically reacting to the music. And so you can do a bunch of different things here. You can blend the colors together. You can have them collide so they come together in the middle. And so it could be a great way to, again, fill the background in on your effects using by having things react to music. It's not the only thing that can react to music. Lots of things can. I mean, even the fire effect can react to music. You just want the music, the fire to go up and down based on how loud the music is. That's as simple as doing that. And in fact, it's actually true that any setting can be set to music. So let me give you an example of that. So here's our fill effect, which we saw, right, which is all static. Well, in the value curves, there's actually a music value curve. And now it's like a VU meter. It's jumping up and down in time with the music. In this case, just to the overall volume of the music. But so any setting can be basically set to move with the intensity of the music. I did want to show you the pinwheel because we did put the pinwheel on the whole house, and I promised you the center of the pinwheel would appear on my tree. We'll set the thickness of it, and there it is. It's on my tree. Slightly to the left of maybe where I'd hoped it was going to be, but that's where it is. The picture effect allows you to bring in any picture, including animated GIFs. So if you've got an animation, you can use the picture effect for that. The shader effect is a whole new ball game. It basically gives you access to a massive library of downloadable effects. Not going to spend a great deal of time on it, but hidden just to the right here is a download button. And if you click that download, all of these effects are available. So yeah, you can just click on it, download it, and there it is. And they come with their own settings, etc. So these effects don't come installed with XLights, but you can download them and use them. So there's literally tens and tens of new effects that are built behind that shader effect. The shapes effect is also interesting, useful. Here it's just drawing circles. Again, you can fire with music, so you can have the frequency of them change according to the intensity of the music. Whole bunch of settings here, but you don't just have circles. You can have hearts and trees and things. Even cooler is you have emojis here. And with the emojis, if you come over here and right click, you can gain access to a whole bunch of different effects. I probably need to make them a little bit bigger, but they're doing roses. So but anything that's an emoji you can do here. Not only that, if you double click on it, you can actually bring up the pictures. It shows you all the emojis, and you can go through all the pages of emojis here, and you can choose one out of the list. I don't know, speech bubbles.
Can you import your own emoji?
Well, the emojis are bought in from fonts. So if you install a font onto your machine which contains them, so for instance, I've installed, oh no, I haven't. So there are Christmas fonts and Halloween fonts out there that you can install. They're not on this machine, so they're not there. But if you go and download Xmas Dings or Halloween Dings, etc., I think it might be called, and install those fonts on your machine, then they will become available here as well.
So in other words, like if you would have to make your own font language if you wanted a custom emote and stuff put in.
Oh, if you wanted a custom one, yes. But you probably, if you were doing a custom, you'd probably just use the image effect, picture effect. You probably would use emojis. But no, we don't support custom at the moment other than via that. Now, if you've got a great idea and you want to, you have a line model that you'd like us to build, by all means, send us an SVG file or something, and we'll see if we can build something in for you. Quickly go through this. Shockwave. Shockwave is something that is great. Great for things like snowflakes and the like, because you can get an explosion or something on it. So shockwave's quite popular. If you've got arches, you're really going to want to look into the single strand effect, because the single strand effect is basically the ideal thing for doing bouncing arches, and you can have them bounce, bounce over and bounce back and things like that. Although there are some better ways to do that now than there used to be. But single strand's quite popular. The snowflakes can be, why did I put it there? The snowflakes can be kind of cool, particularly if you set it to be falling and accumulating. You can have all the snow build up at the bottom. Spirals, very, very popular on trees. Everyone wants to put spirals on trees. Where's my other tree? Let's probably scroll down. There they are. Right, so spirals on tree, very, very popular. And text, if you want to put text onto a matrix, you would use the text effect there. Don't be tempted to try and do countdowns like number of days to Christmas using the text effect. If you're going to be doing that, you would either need to create a sequence for every day. Most people would overlay that text using their show player, be it XSchedule or FPP. Video is really powerful for just putting a video onto a model. You just browse, choose a video, it brings the video in. You can crop it and change it and do all sorts of things. You can even play it backwards if you don't mind it taking a long time to sequence. The VU meter is the ultimate in auto sequences. By default, it just shows the waveform traveling from left to right as the song plays, but this does everything from spectrograms with peaks, but it will also do things like it'll jump up and down based on the music. This one's note level pulse, so it pulses in color when the note reaches a certain threshold. So you set the sensitivity level that causes it to go off and it will jump up. There's videos that go through all of these things. If you're using arches, where are we? VU meter, where's my arches gone? Oh, there they are. So if you wanted to here, you could say sweep, timing event, sweep. And so here what I can do is I can set it to the beats. Right, and alternate time sweep too. So now what it will do is it will basically automatically over that duration bounce backwards and forwards, and it's using this beats timing track. So based on where the beats are on here, it's going to ensure that it always lands the sweep at the end of the arch on the beat. So rather than having to sequence 20, 30, 40 different effects and line them all up and get them exactly right, you do the timing track, you drop one effect, it's done. So yeah, that's a really quick through the sweep through the effect. Actually sequencing, of course, is a much more challenging proposition. I would encourage people to potentially select a bunch of cells here, right click and do random effects. That can give you some interesting things, and you can start to go in and check some things out and decide whether you like them or not. That can be useful. I haven't touched on AC sequencing. Someone tell me how much time I got left. Is it much?
And I got a question about the AC sequencing.
Sorry?
I said I have a question about AC sequencing.
Yeah, I'm about to go there.
Yep, I noticed that you said not to put AC sequencing in a whole house group, especially with pickles. I want to keep the traditional old school with my lower 16 channels, doing the whole house in the yard. But also, I've been branching off and added 6,000 pickles now. Want to do the old school, new school. How would you keep those grouped separately?
Okay, it was very hard to hear you, but I think your question was, how would I group my AC and my non-AC? I would typically keep them entirely separated. In fact, in my show, my AC elements are not in my big groups. I only do pixels in my big groups. And my AC elements, I tend to do things like I group them by type or I group them by color. I mostly use my AC elements as background. I don't do a lot of fading on it. So yeah, I'm either sequencing the prop individually, or I'm just turning them all on, or I'm turning them all off. But yeah, you can create groups of AC elements and sequence them that way. All right, so let's do AC. Let's quickly do AC sequencing, given no one told me how long I've got. Am I out of time?
Keith, you're till 4 o'clock.
So I've got half an hour.
About 20 minutes.
I've got 20 minutes?
Yeah, because we're going to do the raffle prize before to 4.
Okay, 20 minutes it is. All right. Okay, so in order to do AC sequencing, what you need to do is you need a timing track. You can't AC sequence without a timing track. Now, you could go and just create a 50 millisecond timing track, which is just one cell per time interval. I wouldn't recommend that, but you could in theory do it. In this case though, let's sequence to the beats, because I think that's a more useful thing to do. To do AC sequencing, you can sequence AC lights using exactly the same effects that you've been using up here. Some will be really effective, some won't be. But you know, I can do something like drag my single strand. I think tree 2 was my, no, that was, which was my, oh, sorry, tree was my. So I can drag.
When you get your computer, you can make it a short computer.
My single strand onto here and sequence my AC tree. That's fine. Actually, that's the wrong one again. That one.
If you open that door,
So I can sequence my tree.
she won't be allowed in there anymore.
Why is that not right? Oh, yes, that's right. Yes, because it's a spiral tree. And so, yeah, so that single strand on my AC tree is just generating that spiral effect. I can also drill in by double clicking, and I can sequence individual strands if I so want to on my tree, right? That's also possible when I'm sequencing AC lights, all right? So there I've turned on 2 strands on my spiral tree. Also possible.
Not only that, but tell them what happened.
But that's not really how people are used to
Megan.
sequencing AC. They're more used to a toolbar like this one up here, which is very similar to the law toolbar. And so to turn that on, what you want to do is you want to click on the AC button here, and it becomes enabled, and now you're ready to sequence. Now, in the case of a tree, I would probably be sequencing here at the strand level. And up here, you got off and on, shimmer and twinkle, the intensity, which is just a steady on, ramps up and down. And you can come down here, select this, say, look, I want that to be a ramp on, and it does a ramp on. And, you know, everywhere I click and drag, it's going to do more ramps. And I can do that very quickly, right? Very fast. I can do multiple. It doesn't have to be just one. Right. If I want to change it now to an on effect, I can do that as well and just do the on effect. I can change the intensity, set it to a third. Now it's a third on. So AC sequencing is really easy. If I come into the select mode here and I click, I can also use the keyboard to go around. And so I can hold the shift key down and click the O key and do on. I can do I think this is a U, is it? Yeah, it's a U. So if I press the U key, it draws a ramp up for me. And then if I want to follow that with a ramp down, I think it's a D key. Yep, there you go. Now I've got a ramp up and down. And so that's how you would sequence your AC lights. It really is as simple as that. You know, if I want to shimmer, it's an S.
Because listen.
And it's shimmered with a ramp down because the ramp down was selected.
What did I just say?
So yeah.
And you're still doing it. Get over here. Get over here. I'm talking to you.
Someone might want to mute everyone again.
What is it he's doing?
Bouncing on his feet. I'm trying to tell him.
Tony, can you mute the other mics right now?
So yeah, that's how you do AC sequencing. It's, you know, it's tedious, but it's not hard. And if you can remember these keys up here, on and up and down and up and down and so forth, you can also do things like cascade. So I can do things like I can say, look, I want that to be a down, but then what I want to do is I want to cascade that. So you got this cascade button up here, and it will cascade that across that duration. So really easy to do. Now you can also then come out of AC mode. And if you come out of AC mode, you'll notice that these things are actually just regular XLights effects. These are on effects, and this is a shimmer effect. And, you know, AC mode is actually not anything special. It's just a slightly different way of interacting with XLights. It's not a change in the thing itself. So look, in the interest of time, I think I covered the vast majority of the basics. I mean, I haven't taught you how to sequence. The only way to learn how to sequence is to drop a matrix model down, play with each of the effects, learn what they do, start adding layers, watch some videos, and invest time in it. Sequencing is not something that you will learn in 5 minutes. Most of the guys out there that are doing sequences and are sharing them and are doing professional sequence, they've been sequencing for 3 or 4 years. It is a time-consuming activity. You will never be happy with the sequences that you do. It's one of those things that you could spend the rest of your life on to get them just right. But yeah, that's XLights.
All right, I got a quick question for you as far as the matrix go. Now that you showed me how to do the video, I was trying to put it on output to my lights, and anytime I did correct aspect, like it didn't do anything. It just went completely blank.
Yeah, that was a bug. I believe it's been fixed. I believe. I don't know if that's the most recent version, but I saw something a release or 2 ago where someone had fixed it.
It is not fixed. I have a current version.
Okay, well, in that case, you've got a bug report.
There we go.
Bug reports need to be made as bug reports. We really struggle with the poor quality that we get in our bug reports. We get some amazing ones, and we get a lot of, you know, either people just not bothering because they figure someone else will report it. And that's typically why bugs hang around, because most bugs get fixed within 24 hours of being reported if they're material, and as long as we have time. They don't tend to hang around. If something's hanging around, it means it's either almost impossible to fix or we don't necessarily agree it's a bug.
Then how do I report a bug?
A bug is reported on GitHub. So the correct way to report a bug is you go to GitHub, SMEAN, XLights issues. Of course, you're never going to remember that. So you can go up to the help menu here. Most people don't go to the help menu. Everyone feels like they don't need to read the manual. There's a link to Zoom for the XLights Zoom room is here in the help menu. You can just go here. But down here is the issue tracker. And if you click on that, it will take you to the issue tracker on XLights. We have 148 currently open issues, dating back many years. And you can raise an issue here. If you create a new issue, so if I go over and create a new issue, you can create a bug report or a feature request. If you create a bug report, there's a set of instructions here that tell you what we need you to do, right? If you don't follow these instructions, either we'll get frustrated with you, that happens more than I'd like to admit, or we'll just ignore it, or it'll just sit there and it won't get addressed, or it'll just get randomly closed on you because we just have no idea what you're doing. So take a little bit of time and actually follow the instructions. I had a bug yesterday that someone submitted. We go to the closed issues. Hang on, actually not this one. Let me go back. This one. This is a great bug report, right? He's taken time. He's produced me 2 sequences here, one that worked and one that didn't. You know, he shows me that when he's doing this star, you know, here it looks fine, but here it's all cut off on the edges. You know, I took a look at this last night and, you know, I worked out what was wrong with it. It got fixed. It got pushed in today's release, right? Because this was a really good quality bug report. There are some absolute shockers. I won't embarrass the guilty, but there are some shockers. So take your time, invest the time in you know, providing us with all the information that we need. Just because it's obvious to you, just because you see it really easily, doesn't mean we will. I've lost count of the number of times that people have said it's really obvious, and I can't see it. And it turns out they've got one setting different to me, or they, they use, when they go and drag and drop their effects, right? Everyone says, oh yeah, you drag and drop your effects on here down to here. But there's actually 3 ways to put effects on here, right? I can type a key, I can drag it from here, or I can drag it from here, right? When you tell me I just dropped the effect, I don't know which one you did. You could have done any of them. So take your time, be really clear about what you've done, or even better, make us a video. They're awesome, because sometimes it's the combination of things that you do that causes the problem to expose itself. If XLights crashes, it is always a bug. There is no circumstance where some people seem to say, oh yeah, I think it's something I'm doing. It's never something you're doing. If XLights is crashing, it's a bug, and we'd like to know about it.
So if I use OBS to make you a video, that would be more helpful than doing pictures?
Yeah, do that. I used to just jump into Zoom, have a meeting with myself and record it in Zoom. That works as well.
I have a question on a certain kind of setup that I have. I have strips underneath the eaves of my house, and I have them split in the middle so they go off in different directions at the middle. Is there a way to kind of program that with XLights so I can do like the 2 peaks of my house separately? Or do I need to maybe just run one continuous?
Do you have them run the same effects, or do they run different effects?
I have them running the same effects right now.
Right.
Up until this year,
what I mean is you basically you're splitting the data channel in the middle, is what you're saying?
yes.
Right. So it's like that, with them both starting in the middle, and they both have the same effects on them. So how can you model that? Okay. Well, okay, it's not that hard. So let's call this left, and let's call this right. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll take right, and this is one of these areas where having a shadow model makes sense. So what you would do is you would set the controller to be used start channel, and set the start channel here. If you click on the ellipsis, I would say set it to be the start of the left model. And what that will do, okay.
It works in theory, right?
No, it works. It's just because I've now got them chained to each other. Left's chained to right, right's chained to left. I just need to change this start channel to be something definitive. So what this has done is it's put both of the strings on exactly the same channels. So they're both on channels 1 to 150. And so if I go into the sequencer and I drop an effect onto left, so let me do a single strand onto left. You'll notice how it shows up down here in the house preview on right as well. And that's because it's mapped to the same channels, but in the reverse direction. Right. And so when you sequence, I'd actually come into my display elements and I'd actually get rid of my right, because I don't need to sequence my right element at all, because whenever I sequence my left, it's always going to be mirrored on my right.
Right. Well, what I was thinking is I have 2 peaks and both of them are different sizes. So I'm wondering if I should put them each on its own output instead of having them run from the same output.
Well, again, you don't need to. It's
okay.
It's all down to you. I mean, I've only done it this way because you said you sent the same data into both, so it's mirrored.
Right.
They don't have to be mirrored, right? You could send different data into each.
Yeah, I could. I'm just wondering, if I'm looking at buying a couple more controllers for this particular area. Up until this year, I've been using Chinese controllers. So I'm really stepping up the game this year.
Yeah, those things are a bit of a nightmare.
Actually, I've had pretty good success, but there's so much more I can do by customizing it. So that's what I'm working on now.
Yeah. Yeah, look, they're simple Ethernet to pixel controllers. They're okay. They're kind of expensive for what they are, and they don't have a lot of features in them, but they'll work. The ones that are really bad are things like their T1000Ss, the ones which are really designed to just run off an SD card and are very hard to sequence.
Yeah, actually, I have one of those. I've never been able to get it to sequence, so it's sitting on a shelf right now.
I have one too, but I have it because I was trying to reverse engineer the file format.
Yeah, I mean, I have another controller that works extremely well, but I'm actually going to talk to the developer, see if I can somehow adapt that controller into what I'm doing now. Just some things just need to be reversed.
Yeah.
Problem is I don't speak Chinese and they don't speak English very well.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
How much more are we done, or we got? I think we're done, aren't we? Hello, moderator.
You'll notice pink is not a good color all the way over. You'd want to change some of these colors to something else.
Sorry.
Yeah, is there any more questions, anyone? Just unmute and ask Keith. Tony's going to come in. We're going to start the raffle.
So Keith, it's like 5:30 in the morning there, right? Where you are?
It's almost 6.
Hats off to you for getting up in the middle of the night and doing this, man. That's awesome.
I only got up half an hour earlier than usual, so it was neither here nor there. All right, well, I'll let them do their prize draws then.
This layer will actually overwrite this. So right now, we're just using a few things here just to create a color that you go through, you select all the colors. You can do a lot of things with these sections here. What I want to do now is show you a different way to use.
Am I the only one who can't hear him?
Yeah, he just messaged me. His mic's not working. Let me see if you can hear me. All right, let me hold on. Okay, so Tony, just I'll do the talking for you, I guess. So we're going to give away a $50 gift certificate for Bascoio. $25 gift certificate to DIY Light Express, 1 voiceover from Jingle Bumpers, $50 gift certificate for sequences from RGB Sequences, $25 gift certificate and 100 pixels from Wally's Lights, $50 gift certificate to Wired Watts, and a $25 gift certificate to Cool Tees Custom Apparel. You have to be present to win and have been here earlier. So if you want to make that a little bigger so we can see. There we go. Uh-oh. Oh boy, where's Ken?
I just jumped on. What's going on, Nick?
Tony's mic's not working.
Okay.
And then we're trying to do the prize
so
selection. It's not working.
yeah, So if this is not working, we will run the raffle, save all of this, all of the participants
there it
that are
goes.
here. Oh, it happened. Okay, great.
All right, cool. So we got, let's see if we can find, is Casimir Galenzi, 1459 in here? How do you search this stuff?
1459 is here.
You're on a different sheet now.
1581 is not here.
Okay, so it would be
So the
next.
first one's good. The second one's no good.
Where'd that go? Oh boy.
Yeah, I think you're on the wrong sheet, or at least you were.
Hey, Tony, go over and get rid of that. There's an error that might be causing the error. Oh, you got rid of it.
This is Jeff Lacey. If you go there, this shows for Jeff Lacey. Or no, I'm sorry. This is Keith right there.
All right, I'm off, guys. I need to get off to another room.
Thanks,
you, Keith,
Keith.
so much.
Okay, so we can go back on the recording of this and get the winners from when you press that, but we can't tell you who it is right this minute, okay? Because the class has been recorded. Okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, I apologize. There's nothing we can do at this moment, but we will go down the list. The second person was not present, so that one's invalid, and then the rest will go back to the winners that were chosen.
That was under the Jeffs. They were under the wrong.
Yeah, that was
class
the
when
wrong.
that showed up.
That was the wrong class.
Was that the wrong class?
Yeah.
Okay, then we will do this drawing.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll review the thing, and we have all the numbers saved. So I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do at this point.
But it never generated numbers though.
Right, we will generate it afterward on here. We will take all of those numbers and we will generate it and award the winners. So we're going to assume everybody that's been entered there is actually in this class.
I can take a quick screenshot of everyone that's right here.
So Tony, can you go back and let's see column A and record, scroll down the whole thing, and we will have a video record of all of the numbers.
And I am right now, Ed, recording everyone that's here right now.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, it's just technical glitch. There's nothing we can do. Okay, because we have another class starting. Okay, we will make it right. Sorry. Can you continue to scroll down?
Yep, I got everyone.
Okay, you did, because I'm not seeing the scroll all the way to the bottom.
Yep, I got it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Hey, you guys are still live.
Yep, no, we should be. Until it gets everybody's, all the things saved, then we'll stop the recording.
I got it on my end. I don't know if, I'm sure Tony's got his.
Can you just scroll the participant list down?
What do you mean? Like I already recorded all the participants.
Okay, great. Perfect.
Yeah, I got it all. So just get in touch with me later.
Okay. And that's what, Nick? Who is that?
Now, one
Billy.
thing that you can do as well.
Yes.
Go ahead and drag this over to get it included.
Okay, can we stop the recording at this point then?
If I were to type E